I don't know what's going on here, so what I'm going to try and do today is I'm going to try and whiz through the presentation, because the main sort of conversation we're going to have is a sort of one-to-one conversation about this topic. It's a very interesting topic. It's a topic which I've been trying to get my head around for a number of years now, and speaking to academics in the field, speaking to people who are very much at the sort of forefront of this topic. So it's titled Islam, Evolution and Darwinism, although it has very little to do with Islam itself. Islam is maybe near the end. We're just giving a sort of general overview about or how we see the world. Next slide, please. How many people here have seen this sort of image in their life? Pretty much everybody? Fantastic. Now, when you think of Coca-Cola, you think of that red and white sort of stripy looking stylistic writing. The color is obviously red and white, and you know, okay, that's Coke. So this image is the most iconic image when it comes to Darwinian evolution. This is the image which is the, if you like, the logo of this particular theory. And the reason why I like to start off with this image is because this image, according to the academic understanding of Darwinian evolution, is actually false. And this isn't according to people who are against Darwin's theory. This is according to the mainstream understanding of Darwinian evolution. Now, before I delve into this image not being the correct representation of the way that Darwin's theory actually works, we have an echo in the room. I just want you to keep in mind that an image that has been ingrained in our minds for years and years is an image which happens to be academically not correct. And that's just a primer for you to understand the difference between the public understanding of the theory and the academic understanding of the theory. There's a massive gap between the two. And this isn't by chance. There is actually some reasoning, some thinking behind the public perception and the academic understanding, and the sort of gap between them, and the people who want to make sure that that gap is widened, if not kept at the same level. So firstly, human beings didn't come from chimpanzees, or didn't come from an ape-like an ape of some kind. We're supposed to have a common ancestor with the chimpanzee and with other primates. Also, going back, if you actually look at the image, there's this type of progress that's happening. But Darwinian evolution is not about progress. It's simply about survival and reproduction. So that there's two things already that's wrong with that image. Thirdly, we are told, or we are sort of brainwashed into this idea that they've somehow found some amazing missing link, and it's the ancestor of the human beings, and it, sometimes the ancestors Ida or Lucy or whatever. However, when you pick up an academic book on this topic, no fossil expert, no paleontologist can say with certainty what a human chimp ancestor actually looked like. There's no agreement about it, and every single fossil that they push forward is based on at least four assumptions: the assumption of naturalism, natural selection being the mechanism, homology, which is similarities due to common descent, and single origin. Now, you may not remember what those things are, you may not understand them, or this may be the first time you've heard them, or you've heard it before and you understand it. What I want you to keep in mind is it's a lot more complex than the way it's actually projected. The way it's projected is it's true, it's a fact. If you deny it, you're a moron. But if you actually look at it academically, there's a whole bunch of assumptions involved, there's a whole bunch of other things involved. So we're going to be covering science and certainty, the state of Darwinian evolution, God and Darwinism, why Darwinian evolution is unique in the history of science, and a little bit about Islam and science. So all of the people I'm going to be referring to today and the arguments I'm going to be using is not based on people who believe in intelligent design theory or some sort of creationist model. They are secular mainstream people who are naturalists, and I'm going to be referring to peer-reviewed journals. Thank you. So the first thing to understand is, what is science? Science is today seen as truth. So if you want to say someone's being irrational, you would say they're being unscientific. However, the academic understanding of science is it's not that. Science is a method in which you look at observations to try and make predictions about the world, to try and make models about the world, and to try and come up with theories and test them. And science is not something which is absolute, which is certain. It is simply a method which gives you provisional results which can be revised. Why is science amazing? Because it works. So if you base a rocket design on science, it can fly, and you can do many other things with science. However, the beauty of science is that it changes. And the reason why it changes is because you go by a limited set of observations to try and come up with the next observation, to predict it, or a general conclusion. So, for example, somebody studying swans would say, it's a very simplistic example, but hopefully you guys get the point that if you amplify this, it gets worse. You want to know what color swans are, you note that 1,000 swans are white, therefore you come up with a theory all swans are white. One day a black swan comes along and your theory is challenged because you don't have access to all information. Eventually you'll come across data that's going to contradict what you believe today. This is known as the black swan problem or the problem of induction. Next, please. Another way of putting it is, if you imagine those green dots are observations, they are facts, they are things that we know for certain. For example, a particular fossil exists, or the structure of DNA or whatever, or the length of an alligator's tail. Those are observations, those don't change. But if you had that data and you were asked to make a line to fit the data, somebody may draw a straight line, somebody may draw a curve, somebody may draw like an exponential curve. You'll get all sorts of different inferences. Based on the same data, you can come up with different inferences. This is known as the underdetermination of scientific theory by evidence, that the same theory can have multiple interpretations. So because of these two reasons, science changes. And this is not controversial amongst philosophers of science. This is well understood that science doesn't lead to certainty. Next, please. So what doesn't change, obviously, is direct observation. So, the shape of the earth, water being H2O, fossils, and so on. Science is more than observations. People sometimes confuse observations with science. We know science leads to certainty because the shape of the earth is not going to change. That's nonsense, because the shape of the earth is an observation, and science is using observations to come up with theories. So science is more than just observations. And science changes because of the problem of induction and also underdetermination, where you have the same data that gives rise to different theories. So we used to have the Newtonian model of the universe, which worked well for 250 years, in which you would make a prediction. Where is this planet going to be in 20 years' time? You'd make a prediction based on Newtonian mechanics, and that would be there after the exact time that you stipulated. Go back, please. However, Einstein came along in the beginning of the 20th century, and he showed that the Newtonian model was too simplistic, and he replaced it with the Einsteinian model, that of general relativity, in which gravity is no longer a pulling force, it's a pushing force. So he inverted it. The very definition of mass, go back a couple of slides, please. 1, 2, keep going back, please. Bingo. Okay. There, somebody's working away, they got all these little calculations, and they're using a definition of mass, and they're making predictions, and those are being confirmed. However, Einstein showed the very definition of mass that was being used by Newton was actually incorrect. Go back, please, yep, there we go. Time and space was supposed to be fixed according to the Newtonian model, and it turned out with Einstein that it's like fabric, it changes. So you had this massive change in physics. A model that worked for 250 years was shown to be not exactly correct. Next, please. Theories work when they're wrong, even when they're wrong. So we discovered nitrogen using the phlogiston theory, which is completely debunked now in chemistry. However, we discovered nitrogen, from which we get nitrogen boosters. And we can still go to the moon based upon the Newtonian model, although it's been replaced by general relativity. Next slide, please. Theories work even when they contradict each other. So general relativity is accepted by every physicist, so is quantum mechanics, yet at a fundamental level, these two theories contradict each other. Next, please. And you don't have to go far to understand that philosophers of science have been explaining this for a long time, that scientific theories are not absolute, they're not certain. So in Philosophy of Science, a very short introduction by Oxford University, it says something to the effect of, there's many theories that we believe to be true, that we believe to be false today, but that were empirically quite successful. And the picture of the young man there is Larry Loudon from the University of Oxford, Texas. Yep, the University of Texas. And he's put together a philosophical paper in which he puts together roughly 30 very successful scientific theories with great predictive power, which turned out to be false. So this is well known and understood. Next, please. Because I've forgotten the name of the philosopher scientist who said this, but one from the medieval scientific theory, which is not just science, according to proponents of Darwinism and the people who challenge Darwinian evolution. So it is a fully blown alternative to conventional religion. It is also a theory which has been used by politicians and also is becoming to almost ethical system. Next slide, please. So we have three interesting characters here. On my right, no, so on the right of the slides, the black and white picture, that's actually Julian Huxley. Julian Huxley was a atheist philosopher and evolutionary biologist. He was a Darwinist as well, and he believed that Darwinian evolution was a religion, and he believed the world needed to be indoctrinated in this new religion. He wrote a book called Religion Without Revelation, and in this book he argues that Darwinian theory is not just science, it's also a religion, and we must propagate this to the world. He was the first president of UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and he did what he said, because a lot of us today, we are influenced directly by his thinking, because he wanted evolutionary humanism to be a religion and to be taught across the world, and that's exactly what's happened. Richard Dawkins, he said in his book The Blind Watchmaker, Darwin allowed us to be intellectually satisfied atheists. So obviously, if there is no God, then something like a naturalistic history of life is true by default, hence why there's a bias towards the theory. And at the bottom there is another atheist. All three of these are atheists. The bottom there's Michael Ruse, and he's a philosopher of science. And he's recently published a book called Darwinism as Religion, published by Oxford University. And as it says it in the title, he makes it clear, although Darwin's theory he believes to be valid science, and he does promote it, he's a Darwinist himself, he says it is also an alternative to conventional religions like Islam, Christianity and Taoism. It is a way of looking at the world. And from the very beginning, it wasn't just science, it was a metaphysical belief, it was a religion. Next slide, please. And when you believe something to be true, you will see evidence that doesn't exist. And a very good example of this is Darwin himself. So on the picture which shows the 6 types of human beings and 6 types of apes below, this picture shows, in terms of the types of human beings, that the African human being is number 6, and the difference between the Caucasian, number 1, and the African is 5 steps, and the difference between the African and the next number 7, which is clearly a chimpanzee of some sort, or some sort of primate, is only 1 step. Now, This book was published by Ernst Haeckel, who was a disciple of Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin, after reviewing this book, said in a letter in a review of the book, he said about Ernst Haeckel's book that if you publish this book before my book, meaning The Descent of Man, not The Origin of Species, I wouldn't have published my book. So he endorsed this view, and even in his own book, The Descent of Man, Charles Darwin made it clear that the civilized races, which is the Caucasians, are going to wipe out the savage races, which is everyone underneath one. Charles Darwin wasn't making a prescriptive claim. He wasn't saying we should do this, because that's not what he believed. He was actually good in some regards, that he was against slavery and stuff, but he believed this was inevitable because they were the dominant species. Likewise, when Charles Darwin went to South America and he came across the natives there, he described them like savages, and he said that they were really harsh to their women, and they didn't even talk, they used to grunt like animals, and so on and so forth. And he made up this whole thing which fit in line with his theory that they were subhuman. When someone looks at that, it fits in line with obviously the theory, but when someone looks at the facts, the historians, the chroniclers who went to the same place where Darwin visited 30 years prior to Darwin, they described the same group of Fuegians who Darwin describes as brutes and savages who could hardly speak. They described them as a sophisticated society in which they have respect for women, they have gender roles, and also they have a complex language with at least 30,000 words. And Charles Darwin was claiming these people could hardly speak. So obviously his theory was blinding him to evidence. It's colouring the way he actually looked at the evidence. And even at the beginning of the 20th century, we had the hardcore Darwinists who believed in this view, because this is what a theory entails. You have differential reproduction, you have different types of human beings. They used to have people like Ottavanga. He was captured by I think Belgium explorers or something, colonizers in Congo, and he was studied scientifically, and he was classified as an ape man, and he was sent to a zoo in New York, and he was the missing link. He was a living missing link between step 7 and step 1. So he was in between. Step 6 and step 7. So he's in between. Not exactly. He's not fully human, and he's got some primate traits. Obviously, we look at this today and we say this is nonsense. This is racist. This is this. This is that. But this was science. This was science in the beginning of the 20th century, according to them. Next slide, please. And obviously Darwinism as a political system. Stalin famously read The Origin of Species in Russian, became an atheist, and he applied Darwinism to social class, meaning natural selection to social class. And so you have this type of political influence as well. That it's not just a scientific theory, it's also turned into a religion and also a political system. Next slide, please. And a point to make near the end is that apart from science being a root of knowledge, because Muslims believe science is a root of knowledge and it's a valid root of knowledge, it's important to understand that science isn't the way, the truth, the life. It's a method to help us try and arrive at new knowledge, but it's not something which is going to give us absolutely concrete results. And those, although the observations are certain and those we can actually trust, the theories which we come up with, especially the theories in the past, like in the beginning of life, which we're speaking about like 4 billion years ago, with like 99.999% of species missing, anything you do is obviously bound to be a bit speculative. That's going to be different to the science that you're going to be doing in the day-to-day lab, in terms of bacteria evolving and whatnot, which is obviously a lot more certain. As Muslims, we don't just believe that, and you don't have to be Muslim to understand this, but it's not just science is the only route to knowledge. We also have introspection, we also have rationality, we also have testimony, we also have what's known in Islam as the fitrah, which is the natural state a human being is in which we also have knowledge, the knowledge of God and the knowledge of morals and other things. So Islam looks at the world holistically, and a very crude, scientifically theories and ideas which are there to try and reduce the human being to nothing but matter, and essentially make the world look as if it's just one complete naturalistic system. This is something that Muslims don't agree with. What we do agree with is that we should do science, we should contribute, we can take Darwinian evolution as a valid scientific model, but we won't accept it to be absolutely true, because when we understand the philosophy of science, we understand it's not something which leads to certainty, and also that it's based on a probabilistic framework. There are assumptions and there are disputes actually there. Everything good I have said is from God, every mistake is my own, and now we'll actually go to the real part, which is the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll begin with a bit of a discussion. Firstly, I'll run through some trigger questions, and I think then we'll move on to questions on the floor. So I'll get a microphone around so the sound can go to the camera. So let's just start with a basic recalibration. Let's just make it clear. What's the difference between evolution and Darwinism?
So evolution was known about, written about, philosophized about, theorized about for at least 3,000 years. Evolution simply means biological change over time. So mutations, random mutations that you may get, or maybe directed mutations, can cause changes in the changes such as, where some human beings can become resistant to malaria. This is a type of evolution which takes place. Skin colors being affected by the environment, that's a type of evolution. Epigenetic changes. So evolution simply means biological change over time, and this was written about before Darwin. Even Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, he uses evolution in a non-Darwinian sense. So evolution is simply biological change over time, and it was nothing controversial. It was known before Darwin. Darwinian evolution is the idea that all of life has one common ancestor, and all of this chain happened through this blind mechanism known as natural selection. So that's the difference between the two.
So moving on from there, we have the fossil record.
Yep.
Right, and we have paleontologists, digging up fossils millions of years old or thousands of years old, and we can trace the narrative, perhaps not exactly, but quite reasonably and relatively accurately. Explain.
Okay, so someone can say, okay, this is a fossil that we've discovered, and this is a human ancestor, and it's some ape-like creature. The problem with that is that that's based on those four assumptions. Naturalism, which is that human beings have to have a naturalistic origin, so they have to be linked to something else. Natural selection being a mechanism. Homology, which has the problem, like I mentioned earlier, of homoplasy, and also circular reasoning, if you try and say it's literally true, and also single origin. So just to give you an example of one, I mean, there's hundreds we can go into, but there's one issue which is clearly there. Now, when they say that human beings were, we were like ape-like creatures, and we were up in the trees, and then we came down, and then we slowly became bipedal, meaning walking on two legs. And they try and relate this to this famous fossil known as Lucy. And because Lucy showed some signs that this primate was walking on two legs, therefore they say this is a human ancestor. Yet, that's 4 million years. We have fossils which are 10 million years of fully bipedal apes in Italy. Fully bipedal, walking on two legs. No one says those are human ancestors, although those are older and those are clearly walking on two legs. Why? Because it doesn't fit the tree. So when we're giving this very simplistic understanding, look, there's a fossil, therefore it's your great grandmother. No, it's not. You have those four assumptions. The first axiomatic assumption that human beings have a non-human ancestor, that's just a given. prior to looking at evidence. It's a priori, it's prior to looking at evidence. And then you have those other three assumptions. And like I mentioned previously, all of these assumptions can be challenged. I'm not saying all evolutionary biologists challenge them. I'm just saying they are assumptions, they're not conclusions or predictions. Some of them remain as assumptions, some they've tried to verify, like homology, and they've discovered that there's inconsistencies there.
So, just because there's assumptions, why is that significant? Why is that significant for someone who believes, a creation?
Sure. The reason why that's significant is because we're told it's a fact, it's true, it's literally true. You have to be a moron to deny it. It's like the shape of the earth, it's like the earth going around the sun. When in fact, it's just based on those assumptions. So there's a complete difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding.
So there's a lot of academics that perhaps disagree with that, right? We're in university here.
Yep.
I'm sure you can just knock onto the paleontology department or the equivalent of.
Yep.
There'd be quite strong disagreement, don't you think?
No paleontologist will disagree that a fossil that they come across, and let's go with the famous fossil of Lucy. No paleontologist is going to disagree that that being our ancestor is based on the assumption of homology, is based on the assumption of a single origin, is based on the assumption of natural selection being the mechanism, or if not another mechanism which we haven't discovered yet. And no paleontologist will disagree that human beings must have a common ancestor with something else in life because of methodological naturalism. These four assumptions are assumptions in science which you can find in mainstream journals, mainstream philosophy of science books. There is no paleontologist that would disagree with that unless they really don't know their field, which I hope is not true. But these things are not controversial. You'll find these in mainstream books.
So you mentioned philosophy of science. Isn't there just science and philosophy? Are they two different things?
Very good question. We're just told the science part of things. The philosophy of science part, is kind of like, it's just those guys, man, that always just talk about definitions a lot, and those guys who wear brown coats and just a bit weird. No, philosophy of science is very important to understand science itself. If you imagine a scientist, he's staring at bacteria through a microscope. And if you imagine behind him there's a screen, and the philosopher is staring at the scientist. So for the scientist, the organisms are actually his field of study. And for the philosopher of science, the organism is actually the scientist. So it is a meta study, and it's very, very important.
So didn't Darwin know these? I mean, Darwin surely has any anyone who's done science, we write lab reports here. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but we used to write lab reports in science units, yeah? And we've got to talk about assumptions and all that, right?
Yep.
Surely Darwin knew the assumptions
Yep.
in his theory.
And that's why I have a lot more respect for people like Charles Darwin than I do for people like Richard Dawkins, because Charles Darwin was frank about the assumptions involved in his theory. In fact, he said the assumption of gradualism, that if gradualism breaks down, my theory breaks down. And T.H. Huxley, who is known as Darwin's bulldog, said to Darwin, you need to take out that assumption from your theory because it's putting your theory at risk. And Charles Darwin was adamant. He said, no, if gradualism fails as an assumption, my theory breaks down. So not only did he say this is an assumption, he also stuck to his guns when Huxley said to him, you need to drop this assumption. Today, 2018, we're actually at least close to 40 years into a time in which gradualism has been dropped. Gradualism has been challenged by others, by evolutionary paleontologists for decades now. Public doesn't know, but for decades it's been challenged. So he knew the assumptions and he was frank about the assumptions. The great thing about Charles Darwin, unlike the militant atheists of today like Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and others, he actually was frank about his theory. And in fact, chapter 6 of The Origin of Species is called Difficulties with My Theory, with the theory of evolution. theory of natural selection. So he actually puts forward a whole bunch of issues in his theory which need to be resolved before his theory can really take off. And he speaks about the Cambrian explosion and other things, and he's very frank. Now, which guy puts forward a theory and then puts in problems with his theory and actually is open about them, problems that maybe people don't know, which shows his honesty. So he was honest in that regard. Also, in the beginning of The Origin of Species, he says that my theory is not the only theory that you can get from the data. You can come up with alternatives, although I believe my theory is correct. So he did understand some aspects of the philosophy of science, although philosophy of science is a relatively new field that came after him, but he did understand some aspects of that. He was frank about that, and he wasn't into this, trying to show as if his theory is absolutely true. And on top of that, like today, popular books like The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and others, in which they try and say, because Darwinian evolution is true, there is no God. Charles Darwin would have disagreed with that. He said, in my wildest fluctuations, I was never an atheist. So he was a smart guy. He did understand some of these things, and he is very different to the sort of militant atheism that we see today.
So just to make it clear, sometimes in these discussions it's said, a straw man, like this is just a theory, and we sort of undermine it by calling it a theory. Is that what you're saying? Is it just a theory? And what does the idea of theory stand in science anyway?
Okay, so that's very good. So in the public sort of discourse, we say, I have a theory. My theory is that the Queen of England is actually a lizard pretending to be a human being. So a theory is just complete, whatever. It's just a theory. It's something that, you just made up or whatever, based on evidence, no evidence, whatever. A theory in science is a theoretical construct based upon observations, which is there to try and get you more information. So it's a respectable hypothesis which has been elevated to the level of a scientific theory. So it's completely different. So just to say Darwinian evolution is a theory, or it's just a theory, would commit the fallacy of equivocation. It's not right to just try and say it's just a theory from that perspective. It's a scientific theory, and therefore you have to give it more respect than that.
So what are the sociological or political factors at play in accepting evolution?
Okay, that's a very good point. So put it this way. If there is no God, something like the Darwinian history of life has to be true as a matter of logic. Because how else did human beings come? Did they just pop into existence by magic? No, they didn't. If there is no God, then human beings and everything that's alive on Earth today must have a naturalistic origin by default. Hence, people who don't believe in God, something like Darwinian evolution has to be true as a matter of logic. Since that is the case, then since Darwin's theory is there, for them it's true either way. For them it's true, even if there was no evidence, even if there was no fossils. If there is no God, something like Darwinian evolution has to be true. So it's kind of like a after the fact ad hoc rationalization for this actual theory. And hence why also, it's kind of like Muslims today. If Muslims today discover some scientific theory which is in line with the Quran, somehow, I can't think of an example, but something in the Quran which is really in line with something in science, all the Muslims are going to start just really supporting that theory, whether they understand it or they don't, because they believe the Quran to be true. So they're just going to latch onto that theory. The same is happening already with atheism. So because if atheism was true, something like Darwinian history of life would be true, even if we didn't know the structure of DNA, even if we didn't have microscopes. Something like the Darwinian history of life would be true. So because that's the case, for them the evidence is almost irrelevant. So it's true even before the evidence. And hence why something like Darwinism, for people like Richard Dawkins, makes him an intellectually fulfilled atheist.
So as a Muslim, let's bring the discussion to Islam now. As a Muslim, how do we navigate this field? Do we accept evolution? Do we accept Darwinism? Do we reject both? Is there a middle ground?
it's the simplest thing in the world. We do both, right? So what we do is this. We define what we mean. We define what evolution is, define what Darwinian evolution is, and we say, as Muslims, we'll accept it as a valid theory, model, paradigm. We'll work within the field. We'll contribute within the field. We'll work with the Quranic paradigm. Whoever saves a life, save the lives of all. I actually work with 2 evolutionary biologists. I mean, I know them quite well. Good friends of mine. They work within this field. They contribute to this field. They save lives. That's their aim. And they accept it as a working model. But they don't accept it to be literally true. They don't accept the constructs that are made up in the past to be literally true, but they accept it as a probabilistic framework. It's based on assumptions, there's disputes. So you have to have a nuanced approach. As Muslims from the very beginning, we always understood nature to be a signpost to the divine, so they should be involved in science as much as possible. Just because there's a scientific theory which contradicts some parts of your beliefs, doesn't mean you reject the theory completely. You can work within that framework, but you don't have to accept it to be literally true, because you can point towards the philosophy of science and also the actual science itself.
Just one final question before we move on to the floor. Can we expect, or is science capable of answering this question of origin of life anyway? And can a better model be proposed?
Firstly, science is based on methodological naturalism, so the origin of life is naturalistic, according to science. Now, someone may say, we can't go back 4 billion years, so we'll never know. That's not true from a scientific perspective. From a scientific perspective, the evidence is irrelevant. It's a naturalistic beginning, because that's the assumption of science. Everything is naturalistic.
Just before we go, what does naturalistic mean?
Naturalistic means there's a natural cause and effect.
Okay.
Not, God. So, for example, there is no soul. Axiomatically in science, there is no soul, there is no mind, there is no God. This isn't to say science is atheistic, this is just the method of science. So the early Muslim scientists like Hassan ibn Haytham, who used to, who is known as the father of the modern scientific method, even he accepted that when he studies things, he's going to look at it as if there's only cause and effect, there's nothing at all there besides that. But of course, in reality, can we know what happened in the beginning of the universe? Can we know what happened at the beginning of life with certainty? Of course we can't. But from a scientific perspective, you have to assume it was natural.
Okay, let's go on the floor, and we'll start with questions. How we'll go is just put your hand up, stand up, try and speak clearly. We'll try and restate the question, just so the microphone can catch it. And then keep bouncing. So, first question, sister, what's up? You would like to stand up, or you can speak from there? Is there a microphone? Yep.
Jazakallah khair, brother, for such a nice talk. I learned quite a lot, even being a bioinformatician. I learned quite a bit of things out of it. And just from my own past experience in the universities working, I just would like to ask, just from my own experience, I see 3 kinds of students, you can say. Some working with me as students and some colleagues, Muslim people. And one group of people who is in science, particularly I observed there when I was at VHI as a scientist working there, that they would actually, when it comes to all this evolution and Darwinism, one group of Muslim people, they would just keep themselves quiet, and then they actually, do all the work and so get their degree out, quietly saying, Astaghfirullah, what I'm doing, Allah forgive me, and then they got their degree out. There are second kind of people who would actually stood up and speak up, okay, against it, and they put their Islamic views there. And then most of them, they end up not doing their degrees because of certain reasons. Being in university, a lot of people know why, but and there are third kind of people who would actually go with the flow and they become atheist, okay? And I have, talks with them, either my students or colleagues. So just sitting there with a lot of knowledge, what kind of advice you would give to those students to get out of, being good graduates, work in the, science field, but keep their faith as well, because all this science really do question their faith.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. The thing is, it's not the science which questions the faith, it's their misunderstanding of science which makes them think that it's undermining their faith. So those categories of people, the first one who are just like quiet and they're like, okay, I'll just pretend I didn't see that fossil and I'll just want to pass the exam. I would say that's a very childish approach. The second group, which are vocally speaking out against, there's no point doing that. The third one's just becoming atheist because they think evolution undermines God, therefore undermines God. Again, that's wrong. The simple approach is this. Take all the science as science, understand it's based on a probabilistic framework, there's assumptions and disputes, accept it as something that is based on these assumptions, work within that field, contribute and carry on. This whole false dichotomy of it's a fact and it's challenging your religion, you have to either choose the Quran or choose science. This is a false dichotomy. We don't have to do that. We can accept it as a working model and we can work within that field, but we don't have to accept it to be literally true. And we have a book coming out in the next couple of months called Failed Hypothesis, which will be for those types of students, which will be a lot more in-depth, inshallah.
Yep, oh, one over here in front. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for the presentation and thank you more for ending it. It looked very confused. You contradicted so many things. We're all university graduates, and we learn few things which are very contradicted to your ideas. But sorry, I'm not here to argue with you or anything. But
no, we go all night.
Would you let us know what's your back? I mean, we didn't get any introduction of what do you do? What's your field of study? Are you a religious person? I mean, promoter of a religion or a promoter of a science? Or do you work in evolution or evolutionary sciences?
Okay, so before I answer that, it's very easy to make claims. So you said a whole bunch of claims. You said there's a whole bunch of contradictions. You know, there's contradictions here. And what did I study? So I can say I studied mechanics. I can say I studied art. I can say I studied milk. It doesn't really matter.
No, it does matter because, I mean, we're here to listen to you and see your perspective. It just helps us to know with what background you are coming to these conclusions. So we can.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And we got all night, so it's not an issue. If you make a claim there's a contradiction, then you have to give evidence. So what's your evidence?
No, it's not about evidence. It's about. So a few things that I'm forgetting.
Give me your strongest point first.
You said science can be revised. Science is always been revised. So what's wrong with science being revised? And that's, I mean, we work with existing knowledge. Knowledge is always, we gather knowledge through our senses or through research, whatever you name it. And we are working with today's knowledge. After 10 years, 20 years, the knowledge might change. So we gather new knowledge and we work with that. So we go along with new learning. Yep. That's what's been happening throughout the civilizations. You know, we were never like this before. So we, I mean, I'm not contradicting whatever your opinions are, but I'm thinking what I learned and what I do at my work and what's happening in reality is, see, there is no one written rule of anything. You know, it's true today, a holy book, or it's been written. You know, I'm non-religious, by the way. So all these holy books are written by some human or somebody wrote it, you know. Somebody told them to write or whatever, so it's written with the current knowledge of that particular time. So we gather knowledge and so what's wrong with modifying ourselves to the new knowledge that we gain and we progress, and it's all for human helping humanity. So if your statement that science is revised and science can be revised, so be it. There's nothing wrong with revising science.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what you said is really beautiful and sounds really poetic, but I did ask you to show me what contradictions I actually came across.
No, contradictions in the sense of, see, your presentation looked like you are anti-Richard Dawkins, but you are not anti-Darwin. it's just a bit vague, it's a bit funny sometimes, where I couldn't try to understand that sometimes you look like you had a problem with Darwin, sometimes you didn't have a problem with Darwin. Sometimes you said evolution has been spoken for 3,000 years. So Darwin evolution is one type of evolution. So if you believe in evolution, with current today's knowledge of fossil evidences or DNA evidences or chromosomal whatever, so let's take it and understand, okay, that's today's knowledge. So our next generation might get even better knowledge of their existing
I agree totally.
circumstances. So, so your message tonight is you're telling us to use your rational brain and rational thinking.
Sorry, you're going on a bit and you're making some points. I want to address one at a point. So, what's wrong with me saying, okay, I agree with Darwin here and I disagree with him here? And what's wrong with me saying, okay, Charles Darwin would disagree with Richard Dawkins? Because I can give you academics who are atheists who say the same exact thing. They say Charles Darwin was wrong on this, but I really respect him because of this. So let's deal with one thing at a time, because what I feel like you're doing is you're making a whole bunch of claims that there's a contradiction here, you said this thing here, and then you bring in religion and holy books. But I just want to get precisely to what you're trying to say. And I'm not going to let you slip any point that you make, because I've heard this narrative a lot of times, and I want to make sure that each point is addressed. So please could you point out one contradiction in any of the things that I said here, and I'll be happy to go from one to another to another. And I'm not in a hurry, and I'm happy for you to hold the mic for the rest of the night.
Sorry, I'm not a professional speaker, so I couldn't give you a point. But you said first, I'm just trying to imagine the very first image of evolution. You said it's false.
Yep.
So like it's false maybe in your opinion. You haven't given us any references or any. But it will be interesting to read your book that you said is coming out in.
Okay, wait. Okay, so let's go to that image.
Yep.
I said Darwinian evolution is not about progress, and this image is showing progress. This is, for example, evolution, philosophy of human evolution, which is published by Cambridge University. They actually said the same thing. Michael Roos says the same thing. He says, this image is false. And Michael Roos is an atheist philosopher of science. You said that's one reference. Another reference, The Accidental Species. The senior editor of Nature, Henry Gee, who is an atheist evolutionary biologist, and Nature is the most prestigious journal in the world. And in the beginning of the book, The Accidental Species, he has the same image which I put up there, and he basically says this image is false. Later on in the same book, he again addresses the same image, and he says that human beings coming from an ape-like ancestor, and we're shown this type of ancestor, he says no one knows what that fossil actually looks like. Apart from that, you actually have to understand that that image is still based on the assumption that natural selection is the mechanism. Naturalism is the assumption that everything has a naturalistic origin. There is the assumption of homology, and there is also the assumption of a single origin. So that public perception that this is the image that Darwinian evolution works, that is seen as completely false by evolutionary academics. Now, I've just given you two references there and one problem. So what's your second contradiction?
No, I'm happy that you are telling you have a problem with that picture, that image.
No, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that the points that you're making are addressed. So your first point was my presentation was riddled with contradictions. So you pointed out the first thing that you thought was unreferenced. So I just dealt with that. So would you acknowledge the next contradiction?
No, so I can't.
Because it sounds like it sounds like you want to make claims but not give evidence for them. So I want to make sure you give claims.
I haven't recorded your entire presentation. Okay. So how can you tell us tonight that 99.999% of species are unobserved? Where did you get that statement from?
Well, if you were listening twice, I mentioned the National Science Foundation.
Okay. Of what? Of what nation?
99.999% species are missing.
Are missing.
They've never been observed, we don't have their DNA, and we have no fragment of even our imagination that can tell us what those actually look like.
Okay.
And I did mention that in my presentation.
Now it'll be good to check up those things. I'm
Yeah,
here
sure.
to learn.
No, I'm happy for you to check up if you actually know what you're talking about. If you actually say your presentation is riddled with contradictions, then what you have to do is you made a positive claim. You didn't make an agnostic claim. So if you said to me, sir, your presentation has references which I don't understand, or I wasn't paying attention, or I don't know what they actually are, I would have respected that. But what you tried to do is something which I've heard many, many times before. You said, this presentation is riddled with contradictions. You've made a positive claim. So since you made that positive claim, I'm going to make sure that you need to give me evidence for that, and I want to address that.
Yeah, no
so what's your next one?
I was sorry about my comment because I'm not a trained speaker like you are.
I'm not a trained speaker either.
Maybe my statement I couldn't back up, but the thing is, so many things that you try to tell us tonight, it will be good to check up. That's what I'm trying to.
No, that's not what you said in the beginning. What you said was it was filled with contradictions.
That's what
so
I mean. My
my
contradiction may be a wrong word to use, but we're not winning here. We're not debating. I'm just trying to learn from your perspective how my perspective is different from yours and how yours is different to mine.
That's very different to what you said in the beginning.
I'm apologizing. I am sorry for my.
No, let's get this correct. Let's get this correct.
I'm not a trained speaker or a professional in teaching.
But you are a human being, you are a Homo sapien, and you can communicate. You do have a brain, you can actually think.
Through evolution, I become a Homo sapien, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thanks, man.
No. I want you to hold the mic. You're not going anywhere. Relax. So, how many people here, raise your hands if you heard him say the presentation is full of contradictions? Raise your hand. There's a lot of people there. Okay.
How many people listened to me that I was sorry to use that word contradiction because I didn't have a good way to ask you questions, Well, I should have asked you, you should have given more references of
in fact, I was giving references throughout. Now, it's impossible for me to actually get everything written down there, but I was mentioning, for example, when I mentioned species that were missing 99.999%, I did mention the National Science Foundation. I did mention it again at the end. I tried to mention all the references possible, and I did mention that the juicy parts can be the Q&A. So if there's, and I'm putting this challenge out there, if there is anything in my presentation which is contradictory, or anything in my presentation which looks false, or any place where I've misquoted someone, or any place where something looks out of place, I am happy to change it and happy to apologize for being wrong. But one thing I will not accept is for someone to try and show as if all I've shown is a bunch of contradictions, and I'm just trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. And one thing which I'm really, really happy you brought up in the beginning is, you said you've got so many contradictions and problems. What did you study? I'm just going to be frank with you. I could have studied milk. It doesn't matter. Or I could have studied, I don't know, fashion designing. As long as what I'm saying is correct, that's all that matters.
No,
and on top of that, no, you had your chance to speak. So as long as what I'm saying is a fact, that's all that matters. And in terms of what I am studying the philosophy of biology. I'm doing postgraduate studies in that. If you are going to make a claim like, what have you studied, what have you done, what are you doing this? Did Charles Darwin study biology, or did he study geology?
He's a doctor, so he knew biology.
He was not a doctor.
He was a doctor, and he studied biology.
He studied geology. He was a geologist.
Geology is a biology.
Okay.
Zoologist. He was a zoologist, and he's a Dr. Charles Darwin. He's a doctor. Okay. So
where did he get his PhD?
He's a doctor by profession.
Where did he get his PhD?
I don't know. Where did he get it?
Okay, where did he do his degree?
I don't know.
It was Edinburgh. Okay. So first off, he wasn't a doctor. He was a geologist.
Okay. Sorry.
And look, no. What I want to do is this. I want you to explain why you think it's important to try to challenge the content, try to make grand claims about contradictions in the beginning, to try and undo a presentation. I spent a good 45 minutes explaining, even though it doesn't look like you know the heads and tails of this field. It just sounds like you're an ideologue.
That's why I'm here to listen to you.
No, it seems like you have an agenda, and I want to make sure that you either apologize for coming up with nonsense, or you basically come up with a contradiction, in which case I'll change the slide.
No, it's not contradiction. See, I may be wrong in using the word contradicting, but what I wanted to get from you is, how can you, or I should say, where did you get this reference that human beings are more close to ants than apes, or primates, I should say?
Okay, The Accidental Species, Henry Gee, the book.
Accidental species.
Yep. Also, there's other evolutionary biologists who've studied this, and they've spoken about human beings being closest to crows in terms of intelligence. There's also some studies on that. There's the sociological link between ants and humans. The book is called The Social Conquest of Earth by E.O. Wilson. He's an evolutionary biologist as well. So what more do you want?
No,
apart from that?
I was just wanting to know, where did you get this information?
Because I read, because I think, because I reflect. I don't just turn up at lectures and try to challenge people when I don't understand what I'm doing.
That's why I wrote it down. Accidental Species by Henry Gee.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. What else do you have?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I think Charles Darwin's dad was a doctor. I got that mixed up.
I don't know what his dad was, but what I do know is that he was quite nuanced, he was quite balanced, and he is somebody who is very much different to the likes of Richard Dawkins. And he had a character in which sometimes he was blatantly racist, according to even his biographers, and other times he seemed to be somebody of compassion in terms of slavery and stuff like that. Now, is there anything else in my presentation that you found contradictory?
No, I was sorry because you took me wrong completely. I wanted to know more about you because we sat here just through a Facebook share invitation, so we didn't know who we're listening to.
Look, like I said,
that's why I wanted to know what was
and
your
no,
background.
this is a very important thing. Human beings, we accept authority. So when
it's
somebody,
not authority. It's because I've been to many public lectures, many things. So that I think it's a tradition to have the introduction to the speaker and who. See, you come from London. I don't know. That's not been introduced.
I mentioned that he's from the UK. He has postgraduate studies in this area, and he's also in.
That's what I'm missing. That link. I'm missing that.
is it a missing link?
No, it's not about missing link. It's, see, if you introduced yourself with fully.
Look, like I said, my friend, I could have introduced myself like a delivery man who delivers milk.
No,
as long as what I'm saying is true, it doesn't matter.
That's fine.
It doesn't matter at all.
I just told what I wanted to know, but that's what your answer was.
Sure.
I'm happy with
So
that.
are there any contradictions in the talk?
No more. All good.
Oh, there are. Okay, that's fantastic. Great.
Okay,
Thank you very
let's
much.
move on to the next question. In the middle there. Keep your hand up. You've got the microphone. Sure. Cool.
Thank you. So, well, first of all, I want to say that I agree with the guy in the first line that it's important to understand your background, and it is important because
Speak up a little bit more.
so it's important to understand your background, just because we are not expert in. I am not an expert, and I think not much of these people are expert in evolutionism theory. So if you say, okay, I have this publication, and in my field there are other professors that believe that I am, that they cite my work. Okay, I think, okay, you know what you are speaking about. If you are not, since we are not expert in this field, if you are not an expert, you could say something that is wrong, and we cannot notice that. We cannot understand that. This is why it is important to understand your background. But okay, that is just one thing that I want to say. The other things is, also, I'm not an expert in evolution, but I could say that maybe I am an expert in physics because this is what I study. And yeah, if you like some feedback, there is something wrong about when you said that quantum mechanics and general relativity contradict each other. Basically, they don't contradict because they just speak about different things.
So you're saying that's wrong?
Yes, it's
Okay.
wrong.
And are you saying that with certainty? Or are you saying that with certainty?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So have you heard of the theory of quantum gravity?
Yes.
And what is that theory?
So it is a theory in which they try to unify quantum mechanics with the general relativity.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes.
So they try to find a theory to get rid of the discrepancy between the two.
Sure.
So you just undermine what you said previously, that they don't contradict each other.
No, this is. So quantum gravity is a third theory.
Sir, I think you should be very clear about what you just said. In the beginning, you said they don't contradict each other. Then I asked you a trap question. I said, what's quantum gravity? And you said it's a theory to unify them.
Yeah.
So clearly there was a discrepancy, hence why they're trying to come up with that theory. And the fact that quantum mechanics and general relativity contradict each other, fair enough, you can sit there and say, I'm a physicist, and they don't contradict each other. But I'm afraid everybody in the room has a phone, and they have Google, and they have access to professors, and they can easily go and find the contradiction between the two.
They are welcome to do that. I can say
what you are not welcome to do is to pretend there was no discrepancy.
No, but I can explain. So we are speaking about three theories. One is theory of general relativity, another one is quantum mechanics, and another one is the you said the
quantum gravity, which is not a theory yet.
Well,
it's not a theory yet.
Yeah, we should say what the theory is. But anyway, they are three. How do you want to call them? Point of view? I don't know. They are not point of view. They are three topics. I don't know. But they just so there is one. It's like I say, okay, my chair is hot, and you say, oh, my chair is cold. Yeah, we are speaking about, we don't contradict each other. We just speak about different topic. General relativity doesn't speak about quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics doesn't speak about general relativity.
The assumptions of quantum mechanics and the assumption of general relativity contradict each other.
They are no. Well, it's quite technical, but you cannot put them together. So they are different, just different. It's just, as I told you, it's like you have the theory of evolution and you have the theory of gravity. Do they contradict each other? No, they are just different theories. So they speak about different things. It's just that, not much more really, not much more than that. So it's wrong if you say the two theory they contradict.
No, it's not actually wrong, and people can Google that in their own time. But yeah, you're free to carry on. But that's very well known. That's very well known.
No. Yeah, I mean it's not important.
No, it is very important, because the reason why I put it up there was to show that scientific theories work even if they contradict each other, and scientific theories work even if they turn out to be false, and scientific theories work for centuries, and they can be revised. And even if a scientific theory works for a long time, you can't say it's true, literally. Do you disagree with any of those points?
No, I don't disagree.
Okay, so what's your point of bringing that up?
So my point is that anyway, when we have a theory, so a theory is a tool also, you said, we try to understand our world, and we have this tool that is a science. A science is great. It works well, because, I don't have to say why. So the problem, I think, is that if you want to speak about God, you cannot do that with science, no way. I don't agree also with the atheists, because atheists, they say, oh no, God doesn't exist. How can you say that? They don't have a proof for that, right? They cannot say that. So, but if you want to speak about God, the only thing that you can do is use religion. There is no way that you can do with science. But if you speak about something like evolution or like gravity? Well, I will use the best tool that I have, that is science, it's not religion. So it's like, okay, you have a soup and you want to drink the soup, you want to have the soup with a fork. I mean, you can do that. It takes years to have a soup with a fork, but you can take the spoon, right? So you have something that you can analyze with the science, and you can have. I mean, science is not the perfect thing. I agree with that. So, and you showed that there are a lot of problems in science.
These are not problems, and this is again, there's two misunderstandings of what you're saying. I didn't say these are problems with science. It's the beauty of science that it keeps changing.
Yeah.
Secondly, and I don't think you were paying attention here, I mentioned methodological naturalism. I said science axiomatically assumes there's no God, there's no soul, there's nothing supernatural. So
I think it's wrong, this one.
What, that science is based on methodological naturalism?
No, that science say that there is no God. Science doesn't speak about God.
Science assumes there's no God in its methodology. So it assumes everything has a cause and effect which is naturalistic, and this is known as methodological naturalism.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, just there is no the word God in science.
Yeah, because
we don't define, so it's something that you don't define.
Because of methodological naturalism.
Yeah. I mean, there is also, in science, you don't find also asthetica. We don't know what asthetica is. In science, we don't know what God is. No, it's just, in science, we don't speak about God. We don't know in science what God is. Science is not made to analyze God. Religion is perfect for that. But religion is not good for evolution. Science is good for that. It's the right tool. It's the best that we have now.
Where was I using religion to prove evolution or not prove evolution? I wasn't doing anything like that.
No, okay, of course you cannot do that, but so it seems to me that you want to say, okay, the evolution, the science is, it changed, and so today maybe you gave this about gravity, today we have Einstein theory, earlier we have the Newtonian theory, so science seems to me that you want to give the idea science is not so, not really not so good, but it's not perfect, right? I agree with that. Science cannot give us the answer, what is the truth. Science can only give a working model, as you said. And I agree with that. It's a working model, but this is what we have. We only have that working model. If you use religion as a working model,
again, sir, you keep bringing up the idea that I'm pitching religion versus science as if I'm using religion as a way to understand evolution. There's no point bringing up that argument because I didn't make that argument, and you mentioned that like 4 or 5 times now. So I'm trying to understand what your point is, because it sounds like you want something to disagree with the presentation, but you're just trying to find it hard to come up with something, and you're just going around in circles. So I'm just being honest with you to save time. What do you disagree with?
I disagree with your. So okay, I will ask you. What do you think that? So do you think that we have a common ancestor with so that we at the beginning there were the apes, the monkey, and we are from monkey? Do you believe in that or not?
Okay, firstly, sir, and this is very, very important to understand, no evolutionary biologist in the world even believes in that. Not even Richard Dawkins believes that we're from monkeys.
I'm not an expert on that.
Yeah, you're clearly not an expert, because let me explain to you. The idea that evolutionary biologists propose is not that we're from monkeys. The only people who have that idea are people who don't know the heads and tails of evolutionary theory. The idea that is proposed, that human beings and monkeys have a common ancestor, not that we came from monkeys. The point that I'm making is that idea that human beings and monkeys have a common ancestor.
This ancestor is not a monkey?
Sorry?
The common ancestor, is it human? Is it human?
No, sir, I think you're misunderstanding me.
Yeah, could be.
No evolutionary biologist in the world claims human beings came from monkeys.
What do
The
they
claim that's made is human beings and monkeys have a common ancestor.
That is a monkey, human, or what?
So let me repeat that again. Humans, according to no evolutionary biologist, came from monkeys. Humans and monkeys are supposed to have a common ancestor with monkeys.
We don't know that ancestor. That ancestor is
It's an assumed ancestor.
So, but there is this ancestor or not?
there is an ancestor assumed, but we don't know what it is.
But we don't, nobody believes we came from monkeys.
You don't know. Okay, so you don't know.
Okay, so the claim that I was making is that when this assumption, when this idea is put forward by evolutionary biologists, it's based on 4 assumptions: naturalism, natural selection, homology, and single origin. So you can't say it's true literally, it's based on these 4 assumptions. And no evolutionary biologist can deny those 4 assumptions.
This is the best that we have.
Sorry?
This is the best that we have.
The best we have is that they are claiming there's a human and chimp or human and monkey ancestor, which is based on these 4 assumptions. I don't disagree with that. I agree that they can believe that, but they have to admit that those 4 assumptions are there.
Well, I mean,
So what do you disagree with? What do you agree with? I don't see where your point
so
is.
I agree. I disagree. If you want to analyze or make some statement that goes in the science field. So there is something that that we can analyze with the science, like our origin, the origin of humanity.
Yeah.
We can analyze with the science. I don't agree if you want to analyze that one with the religion.
Again, sir, that's like the 15th time or whatever. I never said analyze evolution using religion.
No, but not evolution.
Look, sir, if you want to disagree with something, just say, I just don't like your beard. Because that's going to be an objective point. Everything else you're saying is just, I just don't understand where you're trying to get to. It just sounds like you're just trying to find something to disagree with, but you're just being incoherent.
I don't think that I am incoherent. I maybe just, I don't understand your point. Because you are saying, okay, you believe that the evolution theory is right. Do you say that? Is it right, the evolution theory?
Well, it depends what you define by evolutionary theory, but evolutionary theory, I believe, is a valid scientific theory model paradigm, but Darwinian evolutionary theory is still based on a probabilistic framework with assumptions, and it has disputes about its core ideas. So I don't accept it, and no philosopher of science would accept it as being absolutely true, but it is a theory in science, and I would just leave it as a theory. I wouldn't take it as literal fact.
What do you take as a literal fact?
The fact that me and you are talking, the fact that there's green chairs in this room, the fact that the earth is round, the fact that Napoleon existed, the fact that there is such a thing as human beings, things that we can observe, things that we know.
So you don't speak about the origin of humans. You are not speaking about that. You just want to say that the evolutionary theory is a theory, basically. You don't want to say something about what you believe it's right or not.
Well, I believe in the Quran. I believe the Quran is the word of God. I believe everything the Quran says. I believe everything the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says. But I didn't mention that in the presentation. I can do, but I don't see the point of trying to constantly pitch religion versus science.
Because in the Quran it's written, maybe I am wrong. You know more than that about the Quran. But I think in the Quran it's written that there is no this ancestor, this common ancestor. I think so. But maybe I am wrong. I don't know. Can you correct me if it is wrong?
No, the Quran doesn't say anything about human chimp ancestry or anything like that. What the Quran makes clear is that all of life is created by God, and every single thing that is living is a creation of God, and it makes these general claims. So we believe in that. But I don't see, and the point of my presentation was to show Darwinian evolutionary theory, it's not a fact. It is something
like
which...
every theory, you can say that with every
It's something
theory.
which has these probabilities, these assumptions, and these disputes. So I don't see why trying to pitch the Quran versus science, or what's the Quranic view, because Allah says in the Quran, God says in the Quran, I didn't make you witnesses to your own creation or to the creations of the heavens and the earth. So I can't say with precision when humanity started, because the Quran doesn't give you a date. I'm not making positive claims about what the origin of life is, or what this is, or what that is. I'm making negative claims in terms of the narrative, which is from the other militant atheist side, that we know this, we know this, we know this, we know this. And I'm actually saying, no, actually, according to philosophy of science, you don't, you don't, you don't.
Yeah, okay. My point is, so at this point is just that there is no overlapping, right? There is no something that it's written in the Quran and speak. So there is no overlapping between the knowledge that you can get from the Quran and the knowledge that you can get from science.
There can be overlapping. Yeah?
Okay, in that overlapping, it's really better if we believe in science, not in the Quran, in the overlapping, only in the overlapping.
Sorry, I don't understand.
So my point is only that in the overlapping between what the Quran says and what science says, in that field, the overlapping, we have to believe in science, not in Quran.
According to you?
I can give you really good motivation to do that.
No, but all I see you doing, sir, is you're just trying to find some way of saying science is better than the Quran.
Yes.
Well, I'm here to tell you the scientific method came from Hassan ibn Haytham, who was a Quranic scholar. So whichever way you try and say science is better than the Quran, or science is this, or science is that, the scientific method itself, as we know it today, came from a Quranic scholar. And science as a method, whether we like it or not, or whether it fits in line with the neoliberal conception of the world, it came from the Islamic world. So even if you're going to try your hardest to try and make some sort of war or some sort of discrepancy between science and the Quran, what you can't escape is the scientific method came from the Muslim world, and the scientific method can never be originated again in terms of humanity, because it's already been discovered, and that was actually the Muslims. So you can try your hardest to try and say Quran is wrong here, this is thing here, we have to choose over science, but it wasn't the Western world which originated the scientific method, it was the Islamic world.
Okay, I don't know that, so I believe in you. But really, my point is just my point, that if there is an overlapping, we have to believe in science, not in religion. It's just that, really.
Okay, so let me give you something. The Big Bang theory, which says the universe has a beginning. Prior to this, there was another theory which said the universe is eternal, the static state theory.
Yeah, I know.
So 1940s, we had the static state theory.
Yeah. Yes.
The Quran in the 1940s, like the Quran says today, the universe has a beginning.
Yes.
In the 1940s, science said the universe is static,
Yes, I know that.
right? So in the 1940s, there's a contradiction between all of physics, all of the cosmologists in terms of the beginning of the universe, and the Quran.
Yes.
Later on, the Big Bang came, so that turned out to be false.
I agree with that, but
So if what you're saying is correct, then why did that happen?
what I say is that if now I live in 1940, the best things to do in 1940 is to believe that the universe is static. Because this is the
And
best.
was the universe static?
We don't know.
Well, we
right
do.
now, we don't know. We
Well,
have a theory.
okay.
You told us this, that the theory changed.
Yes.
So now we have a theory that say, yeah, the universe
Yeah.
expands.
So
And
that's-
maybe in the future
yeah.
they will say the universe is stable.
So you just contradicted yourself, because previously you said we should believe the science over the Quran, and now you just explained it changes over time. Why I want you to do so is you're trying very, very hard, and you're trying your hardest, and you're almost like just getting a bit incoherent and trying to somehow show
Why incoherent?
or somehow come up with some way that someone has to choose science over the Quran. All I'm saying to you is you can keep doing that. It's just not going to work. Science as a method is there to give you provisional models which can be revised. The Quran is a religious textbook which gives you information about what the Creator said. These two things are both things that we as Muslims accept, and we don't have to choose one over the other.
But you just told us that, about the origin of the universe, right? The Quran says something. And
The Quran says the universe has a beginning.
yeah, and earlier in science, we thought it was wrong.
You thought it was wrong.
Yeah.
And today we think it's right. Tomorrow we may change our mind.
Yeah, and the only point that I am making is that if there is an overlapping, like in this case, we have to believe in science, not in religion.
Well, no, you're wrong there.
Why?
The reason why you're wrong is because of the point you made earlier, that science changes.
Yeah, so why if the science change, I am wrong?
Because you said we should believe in science over the Quran, so why should we believe something which keeps changing?
Because it's the best tool that we have.
No, that's an assumption.
No, it's a fact.
Okay,
I can,
okay, so let's try it. You say it's the best tool that we have.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me this. Do you believe in Madagascar?
In Madagascar? No, I don't know. No.
Okay, have you heard of the country Malawi?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, show me using science that Malawi exists.
Well, there are like the satellite, for example.
The what?
Or satellite
Okay.
that show the image, and there
Okay,
are
but how do you know that's Malawi?
But there are people that go there, that live there. I don't know these people, of course, but
The only way that you know Malawi exists is because of testimony. It's not because of science. What you're trying to do is you're trying to say science is the best route of knowledge.
the best tool that we have. Yeah.
No, but that's an assumption. So I'm challenging that assumption. Testimony is the way that we get the majority of the knowledge we actually have, not science. Even, for example, the existence of Napoleon, the existence of Genghis Khan, the existence of Alexander the Great, these are not things that we know through science. These are not what we know through testimony.
Yeah,
So your assumption that science is the best route of knowledge is actually false. Because even the scientific method itself is based on mathematics, is based on logic. Science can't prove mathematics or logic.
yeah.
Science presumes mathematics and logic.
But it's
And
the-
scientists themselves have to go by the testimony of other works. So a scientist, when he's doing background research, he's not testing those ideas, he's using testimony. So science is dependent upon testimony, science is dependent on logic, science is dependent on mathematics. It presumes these things, it doesn't prove those things.
Yeah, that's true, but this is the best that we can do. I know that we cannot get to the real truth, but this is the best
No,
that we
but
can
no,
do.
that's your assumption, we can't get to the real truth.
No, this is a matter of fact. It's not
How?
a fact.
How?
Because how can you prove that you are right? That you
I think the main issue that's happening, sir, is that you're giving us ideas and you want us to accept them, but when I'm asking you to back those up, you're not giving evidence. But you want us to
No,
accept
evidence of-
ideas like science is the only route of knowledge, like we should choose the science of the Quran. All I'm simply doing is getting you to try and think that perhaps you should think about those ideas a bit more deeper rather than just wanting people to accept them.
I think that my idea are quite. Maybe I'm not good to explain that, but I really don't understand why you should choose the Quran over the science if there is overlapping. Because okay, the science. How can you say that? How can you? How do you know that I don't know if you're an expert, but people generally read the Quran in English. How do they know that the translation is right? Because they think that the people that translate the Quran, they are experts. So they believe, okay, the expert made a good job. And this is what we do in science. Maybe I'm not an expert on evolution, but I say, well, there are people for all their life, for long years, and they come up with this theory. I'm not going to do that, to study all my life evolution, but I believe in that people. Like you believe in people that, you or other people, believe in the other experts that translate the Quran. We always do this. We always do. But this is the best that we can do. This is
So, there doesn't have to be this or that. I accept Darwinian evolution as a working model theory paradigm. I accept it as valid science. I accept that it is something which is based on a probabilistic framework, which has assumptions, which has disputes, and I leave it at that. You want us to make a choice between this or that, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I mean, if you say that, okay,
maybe you should pass on the mic because we're just going around in circles.
Got a question in the middle here?
Hey, how's it going? I'll be really quick because I got to rush off as well. But just a really quick. There's not really like I'm not here to argue or anything. It's just more just a quick clarification on what you said regarding Stalin and kind of like the social Darwinism kind of side of things. It's 100% true that he was an atheist and that he did subscribe to that philosophy. But I just want to clarify, and I might be strawmanning you here completely, and I apologize if I am. But were you saying that that it follows that if we accept Darwinian evolution as true, that we have to then use that as a moral system? Because even Dawkins himself said that even if we accept that Darwinian evolution is the truth, we don't actually. He doesn't support using that as like a way to live morally in society. So I just wanted to clarify what you thought about that.
Very good question. So I did mention that when Darwin, because what Stalin did is that he took a fact, according to him, which was natural selection, and then he tried to derive a value from that. And you can't derive values from facts. This is known as the naturalistic fallacy. So I wasn't saying that's what we should do. I was saying that's what Stalin did. Now, in terms of Darwin himself, I did mention that when he was talking about the Caucasian races wiping out the inferior races, he made this as a descriptive claim, not a prescriptive claim, which is what I mentioned in my talk. Because if he mentioned it as a prescriptive claim that this is what we should do, then he would have been guilty of the naturalistic fallacy, which Stalin was. Because Stalin did take a fact, according to him, of the world and derive a value. So I wasn't saying we should do that, because I do believe it's a naturalistic fallacy to take a is and derive a ought. So I was just describing what he did, not what he did was right.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I also just kind of wanted to clarify that that as someone who does believe in Darwinian evolution, it isn't. I just don't want there to be any misconceptions that those who are atheists believe that we should apply like social Darwinism and like racial supremacy to society and things, because something can be true in explaining our existence, but not necessarily how we should live morally. And I just wanted to clarify that. But if that's not what you were saying, then that's absolutely fine. So that's fine. Yeah.
I agree, and in fact, that's one of the big drivers of people who want to challenge social Darwinism, that they believe in Darwinism and they're naturalists themselves, but they realize the harms of social Darwinism, and they realize that you can't say that because that's the way the world is, that's the way the world ought to be. So I totally agree with you there.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for taking the time to do this. I really enjoyed your presentation. Yeah, thanks for that.
All right, Assalamu alaikum. It's at the back here. So firstly, thank you for such a great talk. I'm asking a question on behalf of a friend. The friend is an atheist, and I've actually just found out he is listening to you like via live stream right now. So his question was, is there a reason that morals could not have evolved by natural selection? And he said that, for example, the reason why we don't kill, and like, I guess like not killing is immoral, and he said the reason for that is because killing people would be bad for like propagating the human race. So is it what's like And I was having a discussion with him about this, and it kind of stumped me. Because superficially it checks out that, yeah, most morals you can give a sort of a logical basis and say that, yeah, with regards to propagating the human race, that's why we do certain things. What's like an argument
So
against that?
you can explain some morals using that if you, it's like the golden rule, do to others as you expect to be done to yourself. And if everybody did this thing, then it's going to be detrimental to human survival. So you can come up with arguments about why we are moral from an evolutionary perspective, from even a perspective of natural selection. However, that starts to break down when we look at morality the way human beings understand it, because morality is not just the idea that I'm going to be good to someone because they're going to be good to me back, or somehow it's going to help my survival or reproduction. These are values that we hold irreducibly. So, for example, you can explain morality having a naturalistic sort of origin, but that will not explain that will not explain that thing being objective in any way. So, just to give you an example, there's a theory known as kin selection, which is that you are good to your kin because they share your genes, so therefore it helps you survive. There's also reciprocal altruism. So if you're good to others, they're going to be good to you, which is going to help you survive and reproduce. However, it really starts to break down when you look at the fact that human beings help people that they're not related to, and human beings help people that cannot reciprocate. Hence why the explanation of morality from that perspective completely starts to break down. And even some atheist philosophers have realized this, like David Stove. He was a famous Australian philosopher of science. He was an atheist. And he wrote a book called Darwinian Fairy Tales, in which he challenged this idea that Darwinism has given us morals, because Darwinism cannot explain altruism. It can explain altruism with a capital A, in terms of altruism is there as a facade to help you survive. But it cannot explain irreducible altruism in the fact that you care about people as an end, not as a means to your end. And therefore, this argument that Darwinian evolution sufficiently explains morality starts to break down.
Any more hands?
One there.
To your left, and then to the left. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Is the guy on the desk. Yep.
Well, you did say that part of the assumptions of the Darwin theory is somewhat true, and I do agree that you can't immediately reject a theory just because nothing is black and white. So I wanted to understand what parts that you, in your point of view, are held as plausible.
The whole theory as a construct, from, forget me being a Muslim or what I believe personally, the whole theory as an entire construct is a theoretical framework of which each part can be broken down into this is more plausible than that. So, for example, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty day-to-day, is it possible for bacteria to evolve resistance to antibiotics via natural selection? Then that sort of thing is observable, and that's very, very plausible. But when it comes to, say, the history of life, what happened 4 billion years ago, that's when you really get into speculation on top of speculation, on top of inference and whatnot. So it really is such and Jazakallah khair for that, it's a very insightful question, but I would really have to get a particular example from you in terms of what do you think about this. And when I give my opinion on that, it's just going to be, like a wet finger in the air. It's still going to be very hypothetical because it's hard to break down each thing into a probability. However, just a sort of general rule is, as you're going back in history, as we're going back to the unobservable, as we're going back billions of years, it's going to get more and more and more speculative. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. I am not into the subject of evolution or science or anything about that, but I come from an IT background, but I just wanted to understand, like, being a Muslim, how do you explain the fossils that are found? Like, my understanding for that, I'll tell you my understanding of that, what I have learned over time, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, is that what separates the early man, that what is called, if you call it as an early man or with the fossils that are found, is that even in today in Islamic world we believe that humans have ruh that has been put into us, which makes us superior than any other living creation that is there, like animals or whatever it might have been. And this ruh might have been put into Adam alayhi salam, and before Adam alayhi salam there might have been creatures on the earth, living on the earth, which is not, were basically Hawan, or didn't have a ruh in them, and there was no distinction between an animal and the sort of human being that was there. So and might be, if plausibly Adam alayhi salam might date back to somewhere around 10,000 years or something, if you see the Noah's boat collapsing and the Jewish history of 4,000 years, then they trace back to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So might be Islamic history from Adam alayhi salam is of 10,000 years, and I can put it this way, that post 10,000 years from now, there might have been people who were humans or whatever, whatnot, Allahu Alam, I don't know that, but they were not having ruh in them. Is that right? From an Islamic perspective, because...
So firstly, a few things about years and dates and stuff. As Muslims, you have to be very careful with that, because we sometimes, even in the tafsir, when we have, say you're reading a tafsir of a particular scholar, they will include dates, and those dates are not found in the Quran and the Sunnah. Those dates are taken from the Bani Israel, which we don't know if they're right, if they're wrong.
Yeah.
So dates, how old is man, we don't know.
Yeah.
However, 10,000 years, I mean, my hunch is it's a lot longer than that. And I don't see a reason for accepting, that year. Now, in terms of the other point that you made, that perhaps before Adam alayhi salam there was human-like creatures walking around who didn't have a ruh, and they may have even had human-like features or ape-like features, whatever. This is something which has been discussed by philosophers, by Muslim scholars, and it's I've spoken to some about this, and they're like, yeah, it's hypothetically possible. So yeah, what you're saying is not controversial, and it's not except for the dates part, and it's plausible. However, I just like to keep safe and say Allah knows best, and for me it's not important pitching it down to a date, and it's not important about those creatures and whether they had souls or not. For me, what's important is that Allah is the creator of whatever was there, whether it was Denisovans, whether it's Homo habilis, whatever it was, whether that was part of the human Bani Adam, or if it wasn't, it was something different. Ultimately, what's the message of the Quran? It's all the creation of Allah, and it's all there, and our purpose is to worship God. That's what's important. Narrowing it down to what happened here, what happened there, at best, you're just going to get to a result which is provisional. Then someone's going to come along and challenge that either by new scientific evidence, or someone's going to challenge that by saying, actually, this verse says this.
Yeah.
I see that as a sort of fruitless endeavor. Although what you're saying, in essence, is not wrong.
Okay. Thank you.
Did we have a question over here? Right at the front. Farhan, over here, at the front. Just keep your hand up. This slide.
Firstly, Jazakallah khairan for the lecture. As a person who has spoken to many atheists, they usually bring up the 99% of the DNA relation with the fossils. I have no knowledge of science and I'm a business student, so I was hoping you can give me the best way to respond to those claims they make.
Okay. So, Bismillah. Whenever you're asked or you're presented evidence like this, the first thing to do is to just probe a bit more deeper. Okay, so you've told me there's 99% similarity, 98% similarity between human and chimp DNA. Okay, so what else is similar to us? There's similarity of 97%, according to one study, between human beings and mice. There's 50% with bananas, there's 25% with daffodils, something like this. Okay, what does that mean? From a theological perspective, you could say it's just common design. If human beings didn't have similar DNA to, say, vegetables, how would we be able to digest them? How would we be able to eat them? This whole idea, this very simplistic thing, look, this thing's similar to that, there's some DNA similarity, therefore common ancestry, is an assumption. If you leave it as an assumption, it's fine, but they're not leaving it as an assumption. They're saying it's a conclusion. It is because of common ancestry. But if someone says similarities are due to common descent, as an assumption, similarities exist, therefore similarities are due to common descent, that's circular reasoning. All we need to simply do is, it's a similarity, and that's all it is. And we know, apart from that, of similarities between human beings and other things and between other organisms at the same DNA level, which are not due to common ancestry, which is known as homoplasy. And remember, what Darwin's theory is not theory about similarity. We knew we were similar to other creatures before Darwin. His is a theory of transformation, that you can have a bacteria-like organism over billions of years becoming into an elephant or becoming into something else. So his theory is a theory of transformation, meaning there has to be a mechanism of a transformation from something to another. So it's not enough for somebody to say, we are similar to this, therefore we have a common ancestor. Where's the mechanism? Plus, on top of that, the idea that there's common ancestry is still based on assumptions: naturalism, homology, single origin, and a mechanism. You don't need to disprove them, you just need to show that that's what it's based on.
Any more hands? Yeah, one in the middle here. Yeah, just go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My question goes back to the brother's question over here, where he said that there were creatures before Adam alayhi salam, and then the soul was put into him. That's your point, yeah?
Might be.
Okay.
It's like
Yeah.
might be.
Right. So my question is that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Iblis, what's preventing you from prostrating to something which I created with my own hands? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he created Adam alayhi salam with his own hands. And then other parts he says he sent him down. So are we questioning our aqidah with this?
No, we're not, and that's why it's very dangerous to sometimes speculate about this. So I don't say I agree with this or I agree with that, because, for example, just as an example, I'm not saying yes or no. We can have this discussion back and forth. We can say, when the angel said, "Would you create something that would spread bloodshed?" Right, talking about Adam alayhi salam. Some have speculated that means there was other things which would look like humans which were going around killing each other. So they said that was the Neanderthals, or that was Homo habilis. And this is, to be honest, a discussion that you will never be able to make heads or tails of. Because, like I mentioned to the brother there, he gave a plausible account which others have given before, right? And these aren't laymen, these are scholars who said, perhaps this happened, perhaps that happened. Then somebody else like yourself will come forward and say, well, what about this verse? So it doesn't sound right. And then I would say, well, according to that verse, it means this. So for me, it's not really important. For me, what is important is that whatever it was created by Allah, And the minimum claim as Muslims that we have to defend is all the human beings alive today have a common ancestor. We are all the descendants of one ancestral pair. That's what we need to defend theologically if someone attacks that. Other than that, Allah says He creates that which you don't know. And like I said, 99.999% of species are unobserved. So there could have been things which existed, which were like human-like creatures, and then they disappeared, and then a new creation was created. I've even heard from one prominent student of knowledge that perhaps, Allah says the creation of Adam alayhi salam is like the creation of Isa, Jesus, and Allah said be and he was. But when Allah said be and he was in the womb for 9 months. And when Isa alayhi salam came out as a fully grown man, if you took out his DNA and you checked the DNA of the person next to him, he would just look like a normal human being, although he was a special creation. So that analogy that student of knowledge was saying, perhaps this is Adam alayhi salam. The Adam alayhi salam was a miraculous creation, but there's other human-like creatures that were there. So you get into all of this discussion, and I don't like to entertain this, and I don't like to give a precise position, simply because Allah says, do not speak about what you don't know. So how would trying to pin down what scenario is more likely than another, how would that make you a better Muslim? It won't. How would that enhance your understanding of the fundamentals of Islamic belief? It won't. It's just we're trying to work out what's going on, but do we need to know that? It'd be nice to know, but Allah says in chapter 18 of the Quran, stick to what is clear. Don't guess. Don't go into things which you are just guessing, and especially things which are not of benefit anyway. So when, like the brother gave me that position, my reaction would be, yeah, it's plausible and people have discussed it. And if you gave me another position, I'd say, yeah, that's plausible and people have discussed it. But I would say don't spend too much time just trying to delve into it, because people have done that for years and they've got nowhere.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu Subboor. Here.
Hi, it's over there. There it is.
I have two questions. One is that, can we derive absolute truth from science? And if not, why not? And the other question was...
First, let me answer that first question. The answer is no, because of philosophy of science, and that's the first part of the presentation.
The other question was, why do some scientists reject the metaphysical when they use things like maths, which is a non-tangible thing? So why would they reject metaphysical if they're going to be using maths?
That's a really good question. Jazakallah khair. I wouldn't say scientists do that in general. I'd say militant atheist scientists do that. And they would do that because they don't understand what they're saying is undermining what their actual statement is. So you're absolutely right. They're denying the metaphysical, but at the same time they're acknowledging, something more than this. And that's probably because they don't know the philosophy of science.
Bismillah. I'm not sure if this is directly related to evolution, but Allah says in the Quran, وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. We created you in pairs. Do you see any contradiction or link with evolution in how things are created over time?
The thing is, look, there's a whole discussion about people taking Quranic verses and saying this relates to Darwin's theory in this way, this contradicts it in this way, but this is perhaps this. I would say I just stay clear of that, because it's a dangerous territory to say we know for sure this is what God did, or we know for sure this happened. The safer thing to do is to say, look, okay, we know what's clear, we know what's unclear. The things which are unclear, just leave them alone. It's not going to benefit you in any way to try and get to the bottom of that. I mean, if we right now discovered human beings are X many years old, and this is what happened at the beginning of the origin of humans, how would that enhance any of our Iman belief? We wouldn't. So it's like just a thorough waste of time. So I don't like to get into that. Yeah, sure.
Second question is that natural selection. How can evolution explain that? Why did we come in pairs and not a single person? So why did we have to be in pairs, not a single person? So according to me, the best thing would be that we don't need another partner, so we don't rely on others.
Yeah.
So how can evolution explain this?
Jazakallah khair, that's a really intelligent question. Bacteria, like creatures which existed billions of years before us, they went through asexual selection, so they just multiplied. They didn't need partners, and that was really, really simple. For us, it's like you got to find a spouse, especially if you're from India, Pakistan background. They need to be earning this much, they need to do this, they need to do that, they need to, all this criteria. But bacteria, they just evolve. I mean, they reproduce. So, absolutely. I have a video on that. It's called Asians versus Darwinism. Asian weddings versus Darwinism. You can watch that on YouTube.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. I'm just wondering, for a Muslim who hasn't really studied biology or isn't very familiar with the field, would you recommend that they try to delve into it to get a better understanding of how atheists and popular scientists, I guess, make evolution out to be? And if so, what resources would you recommend?
Well, time for some self-promotion. We have a book coming out in a few months called The Failed Hypothesis, Darwinism, Islam and Science, something like this. It's a field which is difficult for new people to get into, and there's a lot of misrepresentation by people who want to push forward a certain agenda. So I would say that book would be a good primer.
A good question. Well, let's go two more. So one over here, and I think I saw a hand over here momentarily. No? Okay, let's go for the first one.
Well, my question is, yesterday's lecture you said that interpreting science through religion, like the verse of the Big Bang Theory and the expanding universe, isn't really a good method of giving da'wah. Yep. So I was wondering, how do you give da'wah when, in what I understood, is that you're talking on the basis of only science?
Well, Jazakallah khair for that question. It shouldn't be on the basis of science, and it's become like that sadly because of approaches which are incoherent. When you're giving da'wah, it should be focused solely on the worship, the names and attributes, and the lordship of Allah. And we covered this in the da'wah training course for those of you who were in the da'wah training course earlier today. And you can also watch the Ayra da'wah training course on YouTube. The focus of the da'wah conversations should be the existence of Allah, the worship of Allah, and understanding the names and attributes of Allah unique to Him. And that's what makes Islam special compared to every other religion. The science in the Quran wasn't used by the Sahaba, and it was condemned by scholars decades ago. It was an approach which was gonna blow up eventually, and it has now. So we should never use science in the Quran or anything like that, although it's the most popular argument. It's also the most embarrassing and the most incoherent.
Who wants to finish us off with the last question? The brother at the front, and we'll wrap up, inshallah.
Does it have to be?
Well, just get the microphone so you can hear in the live stream as well.
Assalamu alaikum. Does it have to be related to evolution only? Being like physics?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
So does my question have to relate to evolution only?
I'd prefer it to, because that's what I was talking about.
Sorry. Yeah, my question was physics related.
Okay.
Okay, that doesn't count. That wasn't a question. I'm going to, you know what I'm saying. One more. Oh, we'll wrap up there. It's getting late. 3, 2, 1. Oh, no, just on the buzzer.
Last question. What books would you recommend a layman in science to read for understanding evolution properly?
I just answered that a few minutes ago. The Failed Hypothesis is going to be out in a few months' time. It's going to be a free publication. You'll be able to get a free PDF online, but if you want the physical copy, you'll just pay for the distribution cost, and we can send that to you from the UK, inshallah. So that's going to be the sort of general book.
All right, Jazakallah khair for everyone for staying. It was a good discussion and an engaging question and answer, as we came to expect. Stay in touch with the Islamic Society's events. Also, there's a live stream to this, so if you did attend, you came in late, the live stream should still be up on the Facebook page, I think for up to like 2 weeks afterwards or something like that. So always a good shot to maybe review and think a little bit deeper. Subboor, it will be in Sydney. I think he's leaving this tomorrow morning. So he's got a few more programs in Sydney. One way you can catch him is not through WhatsApp or social media.
Smoke signals, pigeons.
Yeah, so
smoke signals and pigeons.
You can check out his work on YouTube, as well as he wants to show his Superman t-shirt. Yeah, IERA website. So check out the website.